Hello, welcome to the Evolve Vets podcast.
I'm Anna.
And I'm Bethany. Together, let's stop revolving and start evolving.
Welcome, everybody, to the Evolve Vets podcast. We are here this time coming to you live from Africa with our good friend Cheryl. And we're really excited about today's episode because Cheryl has a fascinating career and she works with all types of animals. And she lives in a zoo, lived in a zoo.
Yes, past tense.
Yes, past tense, lived in a zoo. So we're really excited for you guys to hear about this. Bethany and I just recently met Cheryl on our trip to Africa. We're here to do a conservation project for rhinos. And Cheryl was our roomie. And we knew from the minute that we met you that we needed to get you on the podcast because our listeners will have so much to learn from you.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. This is the first time I've ever participated in a podcast, but I like what you guys are doing. I think your message is super important. So I'm really excited to be on today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I think one thing for me that really stands out when we started to get to know you was your ability to understand what your goals are and how to really stay in alignment with those and really just stay true to yourself. And it's so inspirational to have a friend and someone that we look up to be able to really be so authentically committed to your goals and where you want to head in this life. So, Cheryl, can you tell us a little bit about like your journey? Like, how did you become so self-assured and confident in your decision-making process and what led you here?
I think to me, those are sort of two separate questions. So the self-assuredness is something that comes with time. That's not something that I even feel like I have. It's nice to hear that you think that I do, but it's, I feel like that's a very common thing that I see with students that come in is that self-assuredness and confidence is just not there. And every step in the journey, every step in the career, it sort of builds a little bit as you start to realize that, okay, I've found my footing in this position, but then maybe you switch jobs and you have to start all over again. And I think actually that degree of change from internship to residency to career, you have to realize that when everything is changing around you, you have to find your grounding kind of in yourself. So I don't know that I have particular steps there. I think it's something that just really came with time and experience. But addressing the second part of the question, I think our generation of vets in particular was really influenced by Animal Planet. So
True.
I think there are a lot of us out there that were at home watching things like Steve Irwin and Jeff Corwin and Emergency Vets, all of those shows on Animal Planet that maybe made us a little bit weird in school, but as a cohort of vets, I think is kind of a common thread amongst our generation. I grew up in New Jersey, so I didn't necessarily have tons of wildlife in my backyard, but I definitely collected animals always and was watching kind of the bigger things on TV, always inspired, always wanting to get involved. And conservation was always kind of the goal. So it's been a winding path, but still working towards it.
Can you tell us about that path?
Oh, yeah. So I have always been a Northeast girl, grew up, and I've been all over the Eastern Seaboard, but mostly I've been in New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts. I went to Tufts for vet school, graduated in 2019. And then straight out of vet school, I felt like, number one, I wanted to pursue zoo medicine. So I knew that I needed to do an internship to get to a residency. It wasn't really a question for me to not do it because I was always sort of set out on that path. So I didn't really consider an alternative, to be honest. Keeping that in mind, I wanted to choose an internship that was going to not just make me a better residential candidate, but make me a better doctor, since that's ultimately the goal. So I hemmed and hawed about academia versus private and ended up choosing private solely because I felt like my biggest weakness as a student was time management, getting my cases out in a timely fashion, and I needed that push. So that was the motivation behind going for a private internship, small animal rotating out of a hospital called Red Bank in New Jersey with all the bells and whistles and specialties. From there, I stayed on and did an exotics internship at that same hospital. Lots of birds, lots of rabbits, ferrets, lizards, snakes, whatever you can own legally in New Jersey, which thankfully is somewhat restricted. And then from there, I was very lucky to get a residency, a zoo residency at the Bronx. And that's kind of when the fun started. I moved into the zoo and lived there for 3 years.
Tell us about that.
There's a lot to tell. There's a lot to tell. I think my first piece of advice that I usually tell people is I would never advise anyone to live where you work. I think it's a very complicated situation. But that said, it was also a very cool experience. You know, I lived in a zoo for 3 years. The 300 acres that the Bronx Zoo is seated on was my backyard to roam in after hours on holidays when I wasn't working. But it was also kind of my exhibit. You know, I almost couldn't leave. So as cool as it was also a little bit confining. And the boundaries between home life and work life don't exist when you live where you work. So you have to have strong internal boundaries to kind of make up for that.
How did you develop those internal boundaries, and what are they?
It took time. It took time, and it took mistakes, for lack of a better term. I think when we first moved into the zoo, it was myself and my husband moved into the zoo. We wanted to be the go-to. We wanted to be the place where everyone, all of our friends could come after work and have a beer or just come to chat. So we had pretty much an open door policy for almost a year. People were in, out, staying over. Our couch always had someone on it pretty much all the time. But after a while, that starts to become a little bit of an imposition, because I think as much as we loved all of those people that were constantly surrounding us, people kind of forget that it is your home when it's at their job. It's treated like kind of a break room after a while. So it took a couple of missteps and some time for us to realize that we needed to establish that space. I think, luckily, like I said, these people were my friends. So it was easy to put the boundaries down and say, it's open door, but you need to text me first. You know, you can't just come on in unannounced. You need to have a plan in place before the assumption is everyone in the pool, come on over uninvited.
And now you've graduated from your residency. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing right now and why you're doing that?
Yeah. After residency, I was very lucky to be offered a permanent position at the Bronx, which was a gift, because I don't think I've actually mentioned this to very many people, but they've never kept a resident before. So it was quite flattering when they offered me that position, knowing that historically that wasn't really something that they did. That said, having had the advantage over someone who's just offered a position at a place they've never been to before, I knew what I was getting into, for better and for worse. So while I love the Bronx, I think their collection is an absolute dream. I also think there are some kinks that need to be worked out in that department before it can be a permanent home for me. More so, having been a resident, I was a little bit concerned that I would be the forever resident. And I would move from a work schedule that is only sustainable because there's a light at the end of the tunnel into a permanent position where that same work-life lack of balance was expected from me. So that was a big concern of mine.
It's interesting you talk about seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, because we get a lot of questions from veterinarians about, how do I know if I'm burnt out, or am I working towards something? And I think usually time is something to consider, because if you can see a light at the end of the tunnel, like you're working so hard, sacrificing so much because there's something greater that you're working towards, then it's okay. You're going to have hard seasons, but you have to know that there's an end to that. And I think it was very wise and forward thinking of you to, and especially the honor of being the only resident who was offered a position, to just say, oh, no, like this is not right for me. And to recognize that maybe you would be treated as the resident for the rest of your time there instead of the graduated, doctor and future board certified zoo vet that you're going to be.
Not necessarily on a level playing field with the other senior vets. That was the concern. Not really viewed as a colleague so much as a mentee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So now that you've had that experience, do you think that you'll stay in the zoo environment, or are you looking to do something else?
I think it's a little bit up in the air, and I'm pretty comfortable with that at this point in my life. When I left the residency, I had a lot to make up for in my personal life. There were a lot of people that I either had lost touch with or relationships that hadn't been properly cared for that I needed to go back and kind of do the work that had not been done in previous years. Now moving forward, I'm trying to find something that would allow me to balance those things a little bit better so that I'm not having to do this in shifts of, work hard for several years, go back and undo the damage that my work life has done to my personal life. I'm really looking for a better balance of both. So whether I'll be in zoo depends a little bit on whether the right position comes along. For now, I'm content to just make a little bit of money, because that's definitely an issue that residents and interns have to deal with, is income is not sufficient for life.
Do you mind sharing what the average income is for internships and then for residency?
I don't know that I can speak to average, because I do think that it has improved actually somewhat significantly since I was in these positions, which is crazy because internship was, 3, 4, 5 years ago. My internship paid $26,000 a year, and that's in New Jersey, in an area where cost of living is quite high. It's not quite New York City high, but $26,000 is not a living wage, especially when you're working, intern hours.
What are the intern hours? Tell us. I want to know more.
Intern hours. In my rotating internship, it varied quite a lot depending on which rotation I was on. So let's say cardiology, you probably are working, and I don't want to say 9 to 5, let's say 7:30 to 5 on a quiet rotation. On emergency, we would get in to soap our patients probably around 5:30 or 6, have a couple hours of mandatory rounds, and then down to the ER floor to see cases until 4 p.m. and then do paperwork, because there really was not time allotted. I mean, you guys know how ER goes, but when you're first getting into it, you don't build those moments in to do your paperwork as you go. So you just go, see all your cases. And I sometimes would have 4 or 5 hours of paperwork afterwards. So we're talking sometimes 18-hour shifts for emergency. My exotics internship was arguably worse because it was constant. It wasn't just, ER for 4 weeks, overnights for 4 weeks, and then you maybe get a cushier rotation. It was a year of working under 2 different mentors who worked 2 very different ways and did not get along. So it kind of felt like I was a child of divorce because they wouldn't speak to one another. But the one mentor tried very hard to keep our shifts, which were actually only 4 days a week, which was lovely, keep our shifts somewhat consistent so that it was more of a 12 to 14-hour day. My other mentor went a bit too far in the opposite direction and would work very long hours herself and insist that the intern sort of worked longer hours. And so very often those days ended up being about 20, 21 hours. And then, usually 18 to 21 hours, I would say, for my exotics internship shifts. And then I was on call for those 3 or 4 hours that I was home.
Wow. That's a lot of hours, 20-hour days. Oh my goodness. And that's consistent, right? Like you can have a 20-hour day here or there, right? We all do that. But to do that for a year is pretty wild. And then, so you graduate there and then you go into your residency. How was that?
More exciting. I was more excited about the work. So it was easier to push myself forward on those sleepless nights. And I had kind of been trained for almost the worst case scenario in terms of scheduling and in terms of hours worked. So at first it felt like an improvement, but it's not a year, it's 3. So again, what you were talking about with timing really does matter, because the light at the end of the tunnel you can't see it when you're 3 years out. Maybe at a year you can see it a little bit, but the hours during residency would vary really, really widely because it depended on what we had in the hospital. The way that our zoo worked is we were fortunate enough to actually be able to hospitalize patients and have inpatients, which some zoos can't. But we had the hospital, which was also my basement. And we would hospitalize anything that was either really sick, or we had a lot of babies that needed to be raised, which were very intensive cases, but also extremely rewarding. And then there would be animals in quarantine. So anything outside the hospital, when the zoo closes, unless it's coming in from the public, it's not going to come to me until the next day. If an animal is sick overnight, we will kind of figure that out in the morning. But as far as hospitalized cases go, that is up to the residents to handle. So technically our work hours were 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. to see cases. That said, your patients need to be checked on before 8 a.m. So usually, depending on how many things were in the hospital, I would be looking at things around 6. And then anything that needs treatments overnight or quarantine shipments that are coming in are going to fall on the on-call residents. So every day was a little bit different in terms of scheduling, but there would be some days when I truly did work, let's say 8 to 8. That would be a good day. Bad day would be when we were inundated with babies in the hospital that did not want to take a bottle, and you are trying every 2 hours for the entire night between when you get off and when you get back on to work your next day to get that baby on the bottle. So maybe you get a 30-minute nap in between filling your bottles, feeding your baby, cleaning your bottles, and then it's basically time to try again.
Oh my God, you sound like a mom with a newborn.
Absolutely. Yes, that is very much what I felt. I hesitate to make that because I'm not a mom, and I very much respect people who have the energy to be mothers and veterinarians, but yeah, it kind of felt like that.
That's wild. Okay, so circling back, you've kind of gone through the hours. You're typically working anywhere from maybe 12 on a good day, hours a day, to 20 or more hours on a rough day throughout your internships and residencies. And then for your internships, you were getting paid about $26,000 a year. And then how much were you getting paid for your residency?
In the 30s for the entire 3 years, with a little bit of change from year to year. I want to say I started around 30, maybe a little bit more, and then it went up steadily by 1,000, maybe 2 each year in between. They did provide free housing, so that was the way that they kind of circumvented the fact that that's not a living wage, especially in New York City. But that's significant for sure. Having free housing is really helpful, but still, even with a spouse, I could not save any money for the entire 3 years.
And I think the reason we're asking these questions is for anyone who's considering this type of path, it's helpful to know, to have all of the facts. I think that when we're in vet school, you hear about these dreamy careers, but maybe you only hear the good parts and you don't always hear the harder parts, or maybe you only hear the hard parts and you don't hear the fulfilling parts. And so what's been interesting in getting to know you is that some people might think, oh my goodness, those hours are wild, like myself, right? Like, I did not choose to go down that route. And I wanted to do all aquatics. So I'm relatively familiar with the world and like the work that goes into it. But that is something that clearly has lit you up so much, and you're so passionate about this work. And so you said earlier, there's no other career. You didn't even look, you had blinders on.
Definitely.
You were like, this is what I'm going to do. And I think that's really respectable that you've stuck to it, and that you can see that there is a greater reward that's coming too. It's every single job move you've taken has gotten you closer to what you want to be doing. And now you're doing a lot of it. So you're currently in New Jersey, you're saving up, you're spending time with your friends and your family, people who didn't get to see for so long. And then can you talk to us about why we're here now in Africa?
What's next? Yeah. So going back a little bit before I move forward on that question, I think what you said about repeating what I said about the blinders is really important, because I never considered that there was even an alternative way to get into these wildlife and conservation career paths. Internship, I don't know how your school was, but my school definitely pushed internship pretty hard. And I think over 50% of my class went into it. So it was one of those things that I thought, the best way for me to contribute to conservation living in the US was going to be zoo medicine all the way. And these are the 5 steps that I need to follow to get there. So blinders on, let's go, let's do this. Now, having completed the residency, I'm not working in a zoo. I'm currently working small animal relief shifts, mostly vaccine clinics, to make some money while I find something that's fulfilling, because every job, even the dream job, has its downsides, right? And you find that I love zoo medicine, and I do think it contributes enormous amounts to conservation efforts and is extremely important work. But I think in an ideal world, I was hoping for more of a blend of actual field work as well as true zoo work. And that wasn't the reality that I found. So I'm trying to find now, moving forward, a little bit more true conservation work where I can see the difference that I'm making directly, rather than knowing that indirectly 10 steps down the road, after I treat this patient, it can go on exhibit and a person can admire it and we can take their money and give it to conservation to someone else to use maybe in a positive manner. I want that direct effect. So that's why I'm here. I think, you guys are here in Africa for similar reasons, to interact with the animals that you find so inspiring. And I'm hoping to incorporate this more into my day-to-day. So conservation work is the new goal in some capacity.
We love that. Thank you so much for sharing. So exciting. I'm curious, in those moments where you were having those long days, or, you have those blinders on and you're in it and you're there with the animals, like, what was the driving factor to have that perseverance and endure those big challenges? For like, what are your values, and how is it worth it for you?
I think in the moment, truly in the moment, it was always about the patient driving me. If I don't take this case, no one will. If I don't feed this baby, no one will. Then that's not to say that the other people on my team wouldn't have picked up those things, but on the days when it was my responsibility, it was my responsibility. So patient care was probably the thing that drove me the most in the moment, truly. But when I took a step back and thought about kind of what was driving me to complete the residency as a whole, I think a lot of that is kind of the type A personality that we see so frequently in vets. I set a goal, I have to achieve it, right? So I started this thing, we're gonna finish it. It was never a thought in my mind that I might quit the residency or change my path midway. And that's not to say I in any way regret completing it. I'm very happy that I did. But it's kind of just a mindset that we all are programmed with.
I love that you bring that up. So a lot of veterinarians tend to struggle with this perfectionism, this challenge of needing to do it because I put it on a checklist. Mm-hmm. What was your process of doing internal reflection and making sure that you still felt valued and fulfillment from working with these animals? Like, what was your process like, and how would you share that with somebody who maybe is, struggling with that perfectionism, that burnout piece?
I think the perfectionism didn't really go away until I burned out. I continued on that path. I continued on those hours. And I think probably halfway through my second year, if anyone asked me what I was going to do after residency, my answer was, I'm going to go be a bartender. I was telling everyone, I was completing the residency and then I was out of veterinary medicine because I was very burned out. And it took getting to that point to say, okay, not that zoo medicine doesn't work for me, being a resident, working resident hours, carrying resident stress for long periods of time as a career certainly would not work for me. So what do I need to change about whatever career path I choose, bartender or zoo vet, in order to find fulfillment in the future? So unfortunately, I didn't catch it before it happened. I had to let it happen, go through it to come out on the other side.
What were the signs that you noticed where you were like, oh my God, I think I'm burnt out? What what were those signs that you noticed in yourself or in your work that stood out to you?
I was obviously tired. I feel like physical tiredness is the one that people feel most open talking about, but physically tired, emotionally numb. I think I was still feeling things for my patients, but I also was not as emotionally present as maybe I had been in the past when I was dealing with difficult cases. And that was a change. So seeing patterns in myself, seeing the way that my behavior changed, the emotional numbness, the lack of presence in each one of my cases and wanting to just kind of get through it rather than experience it. That was a change. And then I definitely saw it in my personal relationships. And that probably is where it was most obvious, because I was lucky enough to have people in my life who could see it before I could and would say, you know, are you okay? Do you need to get out of the zoo? Can we jailbreak you? You know, let's go do something that's not veterinary related. So I think relationships actually can serve as a really good mirror to help you realize when you can't see that you're headed fast towards burnout.
How did you heal from it?
I think I'm still healing from it, honestly. And I think that's part of why I don't have, you know, a permanent job at the moment. But it took a lot of giving myself grace, letting myself rest physically, sorting through some of the neglected emotional aspect, mostly with personal relationships, not so much as it relates to work. But again, that goes back to the relationships that weren't cared for, that needed some tending to. Just giving myself time and realizing that there are other ways. I don't have to keep the blinders on. I don't have to keep going, you know, 1,000 miles per hour to make it in this career. I'm not going to lose the skills that I learned as a resident. So I can afford to slow down and take it easy while I find something that actually like reignites the passion that brought me into vet in the first place.
Anna and I have been teaching and learning a lot of this abundance mindset lately. And the way that you're processing and healing from this burnout really feels like it's in line with that abundance mindset, saying like, I don't have to rush. I don't have to do, you know, steps 1 through 5 to become this person I want to be. It's not about the checklist. I'm going to let go of this control and this version of me that I'm supposed to be according to society. And instead, like, whatever is going to come to me because I didn't have to do anything to deserve it. I'm worthy of it, like within myself. It's a beautiful thing to watch from the sidelines, but I'm sure it's an even more powerful thing to feel.
Yeah. It has been really nice to feel the change back in a positive direction, and to have time and space to do work on myself, not just work. Work
on yourself is so huge. Can you tell us a little bit about your process for internal healing?
I think physical rest was the number one thing, because if you are physically under and physiologically stressed, you're, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're not going to make it to the top of the pyramid if your physical needs are unmet. So letting myself actually settle physically, getting more rest, and then doing things like therapy, exercise, getting back into an exercise routine was something that it was such a source of frustration during residency, because I would start a program, get 3 days in, a baby would be born, and there goes my program. We're done. There's no working out anymore. So consistency, routine, even in my complete lack of routine from a work perspective, has been really helpful for me. One more comment on the physical aspect affecting the mental. My 3rd year of residency, I have a terrible immune system. So disclaimer, I pick up bugs all the time. However, in my 3rd year of residency, I was sick from the time I got back from Zoo Conference in late September until May, with the exception of 3 weeks. And it was the running joke in the department, like, oh, she's got a mask on again, because I would get a cold, I would get better, and then I would immediately get a cold and get better. It was continuous, to the point that I started wondering, you know, am I okay? Like, am I seriously ill? I'm not. I've had one cold since I left the residency. So I think we underestimate the power of stress to really wear you down. Even when you know it mentally, you kind of think you're okay. You're not okay.
Absolutely. Anna and I have been reading this book called The Big Leap, and it actually talks about how your body will respond when maybe things aren't aligned or you're not in the right space, or you're hitting like this upper limit of what you should or could be doing. And then I think one other thing that we've talked about this week, can you tell us a little bit about your morning routine and has that helped you develop in this healing from burnout stage?
I think my morning routine has been in place since prior to vet school, even, honestly. And I'm using the term routine loosely here because it's not truly that much of a routine, but I recognize in myself a need to be nonverbal when I first wake up. So no, my cats are fine. I can talk to my cats, but human interaction is not usually something that I'm interested in for the first 10 to 15 minutes. If I can have a half an hour, even better, after first waking up. And allowing myself to have that time, even on my busiest days and my earliest mornings, was really helpful for setting me up to have a good day. If I woke up, rolled out of bed, went straight to work, I was grumpy. And you know how that affects. It just colors everything that comes your way that day. Every single case has a negative spin on it, and it didn't really have to be that way. So that morning routine has followed through.
What do you do when you wake up?
I get up. I generally don't actually eat breakfast, especially if it's an early morning, but I have coffee either by myself or at the time during my residency with my husband. We would sit down and have coffee together while I highlighted my list for the day without speaking. And honestly, just spending that time alone, getting dressed. And it doesn't have, this is basically my zoo uniform. It is certainly not a fashion statement, but getting dressed in a way that I felt good about. If I couldn't control the uniform, I could still control the way I was presenting myself to the world. So making sure I gave myself the time to run a brush through my hair and, do some form of a skincare routine, rehydrate, get everything to the point where I felt presentable and confident, set me up in a good way for the day.
We always ask guests who come on what their morning routine is, and so it's nice to hear the variety. And so yours is a new one that we've heard, but it makes a lot of sense because there's studies that are done. If you feel confident in the way that you feel and look, then you're going to show up in a different way throughout your entire day. So I love hearing that variety. And for people who think that maybe journaling in the morning or working out in the morning is overwhelming, this is another option. It's like, this is just you time. That's your version of self-care.
Yeah.
And you know that you needed that. It was sacred time for you. So it reminds me of the fisherman story. And it's a story that a coach shared with me about. There was a fisherman and he lived on the coast. I think it was Mexico or somewhere. And he was fishing in his little boat and there were all these fish, and he came back and he had this like abundance of fish there. And one day he took a businessman from New York out on his boat, and the businessman from New York was like, I could buy you another boat, and then we could make this whole production and we can turn it into a business. And there's like so many fish out here, and people want to buy it. And so we can get all of these boats and I can fund it and we can turn it into this really big business, ship fish all over the world. And then you can make all of this money, and then you can come back and you can just spend your time relaxing, hanging out on the beach and enjoy, the fruits of your labor. And the fisherman was basically like, but I'm already doing that. Right. He was like, I go out on my boat in the morning, get just the fish that I need for me, my family, and, to sell a few people in the village. And then I come back and I hang out on my hammock with my family. And that's what I'm already doing. And so the moral of the story is like, focus on what you have right in front of you, right? Don't like, it's easy to go and chase money and other things, but know what is important to you and what makes you happy. And it might already be right in front of you. And so I guess the question that Bethany and I have, because for me, at least personally, I spent years since I was 18 or 19 years old. I had about 5 or 6 dedicated years to aquatic animal medicine. That's all I wanted to do. I got a certification called MARVET. I spent time rehabbing sea lions. I did a marine mammal training internship, worked like all the things, worked at aquariums. I have a thesis and research on bottlenose dolphins. I was like in it. I went to the conferences, everything. And so I knew what you had to do to make it there. And something just switched for me at the end of my second year of vet school. And I started questioning, is it worth it? And I don't know, because sometimes it still haunts me, if I made the right decision. And I switched. I got really interested in the business side of vet med. I saw that I was never particularly interested in small animal medicine. And all of the clinics that I had been in, people were generally pretty unhappy. And so that was my experience. And when I learned about the business side, I was like, oh, there's a lot of opportunity to do things better in vet med and to change it, whether it's for the veterinarians, the nurses, the clients, people with pets. And so I followed that path because I knew that if I went down the path of zoo med or aquatic medicine, that I would graduate and then I would need to do an internship. And then I would probably need to do another internship. Yeah. And then I might need to do a third internship. Yep. And then maybe I would get some residency type position at the 7 aquariums in the United States. And then after that, are there even jobs available? And I would need, I had just met my now husband at the time, and you know, would there be, would he move with me to all these places? I wouldn't be able to stay where I was. I'd for sure have to be moving all of those years. And so there were a lot of trade-offs to consider, and all of this to ask you, what helped you to keep your blinders on, and how did you reconnect with your why? And so I just kind of want to dissect the two paths that people can take, because I do think that a lot of vet students go through this and they're like, what am I going to do? You come into vet school thinking you're going to do one thing, and then something happens and you choose another. And maybe there's some like lingering regret in there, or like what ifs. And so can you speak to what kept you going in those really tough times? I know you touched on patient care, but really getting into it.
I think I have a really wonderful mentor who I connected with for the first time as a first-year student at Tufts. She was in our zoo companion animal department and is a boarded zoo vet. She actually ended up being one of my mentors in my exotics internship, who I adored. Not the one that made me work 22-hour days. So she gave me wonderful advice on the very first time I ever met her. When we sat down, she said, it's not really about if you can become a zoo vet, it's about whether or not you continue wanting to, because it is all about endurance. And what you just said about people dropping off, you see it at every step. Zoo medicine, aquatic animal medicine, exotics are so romanticized, and maybe that goes back to the Animal Planet thing. We all wanted to be Jeff
Corwin
and Steve Irwin.
Absolutely.
So a lot of people come into vet school thinking, that's what I want to dedicate my life to, but they don't know that much about it. Maybe, or maybe they do. But every step, let's say first year, you want to be a zoo vet. Second year, you see something about the salary of an emergency veterinarian versus a zoo veterinarian. And that kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit and think, oh, okay, well, you know, I love it, but let's keep going. But you keep that in the back of your mind. Of course, that's a very different situation when you're in vet school and not trying to build a life financially outside of vet school. Then you get to third year and people are talking about whether or not they're going to apply for an internship the following year. Once you realize what goes into every step, I feel like people fall off. So whether it's the salary or, okay, I can get through one internship, but I have to do 2, or you're telling me that now the standard is becoming 3, that is very off-putting to a lot of people for a very good reason. You have to endure a lot. You have to endure your cohorts, everyone who's in your class, graduating, having a life. And a portion of those people that you were with a year before are going to go right out of vet school and start earning real money and having a family and putting down roots. And maybe the first year, that's not that big a deal. But when you're 3, 4, 5 years out, and a bigger and bigger proportion of the people that you went to school with are able to do things that you can't do, you're still in a phase where you're missing weddings and missing births of children that mean a lot to you. And it just becomes increasingly, the list of detractors start to weigh a little bit more heavily. So I don't know what the factor is specifically that kind of kept me in it, as opposed to the factors that might weigh more heavily for those who decide not to. But I think it's very valid to realize that it's worth exploring, but keeping your options open doesn't mean that you're not dedicated. You can look into it and realize that maybe the path isn't for you and diverge, and that's okay. I think for me personally, part of what kept me on the path, other than just putting the blinders on and saying, let's do this, was that this was quite literally the reason that I came to vet medicine in the first place. I didn't come in thinking maybe small animal, maybe equine. I really wanted zoo medicine, and conservation was always at the core of that. So knowing that there was a path to get me closer to working in conservation, working in zoos, really was my motivator all along, and that was enough for me. But that doesn't mean that it needs to be enough for other people, because there are a lot of sacrifices.
I'm curious about what your personal values are and how that might or might not have left you staying in that perseverance and that endurance to end up here, where you'll be sitting for board soon.
One thing that I know about myself that has been a huge contributing factor is that I've always just really wanted to make a difference in the field. So whether that's truly in the field working directly like we are now with rhinos, or contributing in a big way in research, or being someone who is constantly putting out textbooks that better the lives of zoo animals all over the country, contributing to conservation has always been my goal and something that drives me in a big way. So I knew that that was going to come at the expense of my relationships, of my wallet. I knew that comfortable living might maybe be attainable, but luxurious living never will be. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. So I don't really value the material so much as I value wanting to contribute.
I really appreciate you sharing that. That's really amazing. I think everybody has their own unique values. And so I know that you're joining the Evolve Vets membership. And so for anybody else who's interested in discovering more about your personal values and understanding, like, who am I, what impacts me? It sounds like, just from hearing you talk right now, impact is a really big value for you.
But please help me.
Yes,
Evolve Vets.
Absolutely. Yes. Impact is also one of my core values. And so I can feel deeply like changing the vet med for me is through the Evolve Vets, like helping out women and really expanding their mind and having them understand this abundance mindset. And it's cool to hear how conservation is one of the ways that you feel like you can bring in this really big impact. With that, I think the key is that everybody's values are a little bit different, and this impact for you and me are different, even though impact's at the core.
Sure.
What impact and how I can make an influence on veterinary medicine is very different from the skills that you have and the impact that you're going to make on veterinary medicine. And so I think that that's just a beautiful thing. And that's what comes down to the internal work and the self-influence and self-understanding that it really comes down to.
You can't help anyone. It's like the plain oxygen masks, right? Like, put yours on first. You can't help anyone, whether it's an animal or a person, if you're completely burnt out.
So everyone has a different view of impact. How has your take on impact contributed to you staying in this career path?
That being kind of my core driver has helped me prioritize life things, right? Everyone has their list, which generally has a lot of the same categories on it: family, friends, work. It's just about kind of the order that you want to tend to those things. And I think that varies for all of us, right? So I have my family that I love very much, my friends that I love very much, but I've always been most driven by my work. And that comes through, I think, most obviously when I talk to friends who are currently more settled and have children, and I'm, I have a 1-year lease and might be in Africa for a couple months out of the year. Like, what? So there's a little bit more consistency to other people's lives. That's not something that I want or need. I don't need roots. I don't need consistency. I think I'm willing to sacrifice those things to make an impact. Family life is something everybody has their own kind of views on what's going to fulfill them. And I've never wanted kids. I know that's, pretty common amongst a lot of female veterinarians, but the desire to have an impact has been a driver there. And that is in no way to imply that you cannot do both. I know a lot of people that do both incredibly well, but I don't think I'm one of those people. I think I tend to hyperfocus a little bit. And so if I were to have children, I am not sure that I could stay the course to make the impact that I want to see, as opposed to some of those other people that do it all and do it well. I'm not sure I have that in me. So for me, it's work over having a family, which is a sacrifice for sure, but one I'm comfortable with.
Right. And it comes down to your values. That's helped you be able to decipher that life choice. And speaking of values, and you, as you've grown in your career and you've navigated burnout, we have been talking lately here in Africa about what your next steps are. And one of the things that Bethany and I have seen in real life, which is super cool, is that you said no to the opportunity of being a full-time veterinarian at the Bronx Zoo. And we believe, and through our process, we teach that when you say no, when something is not aligned, that something even better is going to come. So if not this opportunity, then something better. And you got some really good news on this trip. Yeah. Can you tell us about how that news and taking the leap of going on this trip and investing money to come volunteer here and help with conservation work is leading you to the next right step?
Yeah. You guys are into manifestation. I know that. And I do feel like this has been kind of a real-time example of manifestation, because I came on this trip, like you said, to get my hands dirty and to be in the field and to meet people, as well as to make a difference in a more immediate sense. And it paid off within, day 3 of the trip, that I was getting good news, which feels insane. The connections that we made on day 1 and 2 were people that I did not know at all prior to coming on this trip, and yet they were willing to reach out for me to other people in the field already to try and get a spot for me in a course that is full, that I've been trying to get into, a South African, essentially wildlife course, which teaches things like darting and how to handle dangerous drugs appropriately, things that I have some background in, but certainly not in the wildlife realm. I have people that I barely know reaching out for me to try and get me a position there, and also a potential opportunity to come back in just a couple months and intern with the veterinarians that we're working with now on this rhino mission, which was so unexpected and really fortuitous, actually, because I had been trying to get in with them. Funny enough, I didn't actually even know that it was the same practice that I was reaching out to for opportunities to intern. And it only clicked when I saw the Instagram handles of the people that were with, that I had actually been bothering them on the internet for a position as an intern, which it looks like I'm going to get in August. So,
it's amazing. Yeah, it's so amazing. And did you have any hesitation coming on this trip?
Financially,
yeah,
I did. Yeah, because it is a big investment. You might have done some math on my salaries for the last few years. It's not great. So I'm working a contract type job. I worked on a day-to-day basis. So I think in terms of shifts, and being here means I'm losing, the shifts that I could be making up some of that deficit that I'm in as a result of my path. So yeah, I definitely had some monetary and financial hesitations, but it doesn't matter. They're out the window. They're gone, because that opportunity is one I've been trying to come by for months. And yet it took 3 days of being here to kind of make that come to fruition.
It's such a great example. And and Bethany and I have learned this in our lives too, that when there's something that you want to do or manifest or call in, and then you kind of like look at, okay, well, what do I need to do next? You need to first say no to things that are not aligned. So that's detoxing, getting rid of that so that you can clear space for something better to come in. And so when you say no, and then an opportunity or a test will be presented to you to know like, okay, well, are you really going to level up your worth and dance with the universe? And are you going to call this thing in? And so that test for you was there's this opportunity to go to Africa and give up the time of you working shifts. And also it's a financial investment to come here. And so that probably felt pretty scary to you.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, I'm going to take the leap because this is like in my heart and my soul, it feels right. And so then you did that. And then you get here and 3 days later, it's so fast. It can happen so quickly. Then all of a sudden you get these two opportunities to do something that you've been trying to do for years. It's really going to move the needle on what you do next. It's huge. And we can't wait to see what's to come.
I think dancing with the universe is a perfect way to put it, because you just kind of have to go with it and see what happens. You don't necessarily, it's not choreographed. You learn the moves as you go. And that's been exactly what my process has looked like post residency, is just trusting that I will find a way to incorporate work that is meaningful to me and work that might allow me to have a little bit of a life outside of work as well.
That's so good. I love that so much. I have this question that's kind of pinging in my head that keeps coming up, and like people are probably so eager just to be like, what is it like, living in a zoo?
Sure.
What cute baby animals did you take care of?
Okay, let me answer that first, because that's quick.
Yeah, okay, great.
So, short answer, mostly mammals, lots of hoofstock. When I first started the residency, we had 6 black buck antelope within the first 2 weeks. So that's 6 babies that require bottles, 7 times a day. Luckily, you can kind of batch them when they're like that. But black buck, Eld's deer, axis deer, Thompson's gazelles, Rodriguez fruit bats, rock hyrax, a bison. She's my favorite. Don't tell the others. I'm forgetting some. No carnivores. I did not get to hand raise a carnivore, but that's probably for the best for the animals. Those animals don't necessarily end up totally normal mentally sometimes. But yeah, that's the list that comes to mind immediately. There's definitely more that I'm missing. Sorry, babies.
We love babies.
Okay, stories. So the first one I'm going to tell, I'll come back to your mammals. First one I'm going to tell is actually about an alligator who, believe it or not, who I loved dearly. Her name was Maggie, also known as Godzilla in some publications. But this alligator she came into us on a very cold day in February, fished out of a lake in New York City. So this is middle of a New York winter. New York lakes should not contain crocodilians. And yet this girl washed up looking, she looked like she was dead. They assumed she was dead when they first approached her because she was so sick, so emaciated, and pretty much non-responsive. She first went and got stabilized at a different facility for a couple of hours and then came into us at the zoo to continue her care or decide not to. At that point, she already had a media following. So her case became very complicated very quickly because the stakeholders on this animal included people outside of the zoo, people in the public, people with louder voices. But she came to us looking, again, incredibly emaciated. We did her initial diagnostics and we thought for sure that she was not going to make it beyond that day. There was a voice, a very strong voice, who decided that they really wanted to give her a chance, despite the way that her case looked. And so we decided to try and medically stabilize her. We found out very quickly that it was going to be more challenging than we even expected, because on her initial radiographs, it looked like there was something funky going on in the GI tract. So we did a contrast study, which very nicely highlighted, the photos are on Google actually. She has a bathtub plug, had a bathtub plug in her stomach. And it was perfectly on rads. You can tell immediately that it's a bathtub plug. So that tells me 2 things. Number 1, she was a pet, and she was a very improperly cared for pet that probably lived in someone's tub, got sick, and was discarded. Number 2, that her path was going to be even more difficult than we initially thought, because feeding her and getting her stronger now came with the challenge of how do we get around this tub plug? Luckily, the contrast study showed us that she could actually get liquids through. So we spent months tube feeding this alligator, trying to get her strength up, addressing the wounds that she came in with, treating her preemptively for both bacterial and fungal infections, just trying to get her on the right path to be strong enough to withstand surgery and remove that plug. She did better for a little while, and then she plateaued and just was not gaining any more weight. So the time to move was then. We didn't really have a lot of wiggle room. We decided that she was still too sick to withstand anesthesia, and so it was going to have to be some sort of minimally invasive procedure to get this bathtub plug out. And scoping seemed like maybe it would provide the right answer, but we knew it was going to be a challenge to pinch and pull that bathtub plug out. And I had been offering for a few weeks that I thought with a small alligator, my long, skinny arms might be the perfect instrument to actually reach in and retrieve that bathtub plug. And initially, that was not very well received. People did not like that idea. But as we got closer and realized we really can't anesthetize this gator, people started to kind of think about it a little bit. You know, what if the scope doesn't work? What other options do we have? Are you still offering your arms? Yes. So on the day that we decided to do this procedure, she, again, was a small alligator, but no anesthesia. She couldn't withstand it. No sedatives. We essentially put a PVC pipe in her mouth the same way that we would feed her. And I was able to reach my arm through the PVC pipe and retrieve that bathtub plug. And that story will stay with me forever, because not only did I feel so validated that the thing I had been offering to do for weeks actually worked, but it also was a moment of collaboration that I didn't get to see very often in the zoo. There were probably 30 people in the room that day, and I had people commenting from other areas of the hospital that they've never heard cheering so loud, because everyone was just so happy that we were able to do this. It was a very good example and showing of teamwork and trust that I didn't get to see all that often at the zoo. But it also was a patient that I felt very connected to. So in a lot of ways, that story became very important to my residency experience and will stay with me for a long time.
What lesson did it teach you?
To trust myself, to not be so quickly put off by someone telling me no, because the very first time I offered that I thought I could reach this bathtub plug, I was quite literally laughed at. And I remember thinking that must have been a really stupid idea. You know, that was so dumb. Why would I think, duh, I'm not going to reach my... But that's the only way we were able to get it out. So I think trusting my gut and maybe advocating for what I thought was a reasonable plan a little bit sooner was a big lesson for me in that.
And now you have Godzilla tattooed on your arm?
I do. Yes. Yeah. There
She's
she is.
beautiful. We love her. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that story and the lessons that you learned. I feel like sometimes the patients that we see in hospital are actually some of the greatest teachers, and just to be present and learn from them every chance we get. At the Evolve Vets community and here on our podcast, we love passing on wisdom to others so that way they can learn from us as well. So if you were giving advice to another female veterinarian who may be, you know, really connected with you on this podcast, or maybe is interested in conservation or zoo or wildlife, what advice would you give to them?
I would tell them that things are changing in a good way, and that being part of that change is the best way to advance it. And what I mean by that is, if this path that I took is not the right one for you, if you don't want to commit to 5 years, 6 years of indentured servitude, don't think that that puts you completely off of your goals. You can find workarounds. You can find alternative ways, whether that's getting a master's in something conservation-based and being able to integrate that in your veterinary practice, or going the traditional route maybe, or deciding that internship, residency, and higher degrees are not for you, and you just want to get the experience in a different way through networking and connection. Trust your gut. Trust that you know what's best for you and how much you can handle, and recognize that there is more than one path. You can make one for yourself.
All right. So where can people find you and connect with you? What's the best way?
Sure. So I am on Instagram. I have a personal Instagram. My Instagram handle is ShareStout. I'm just starting on TikTok. I'm way behind. And that handle is Safari and Scrubs. And that's probably where I'm going to be most focused on putting out content that's veterinary related and conservation related in the future. So that might be the best way. Yeah, I would go Instagram or TikTok.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Cheryl, for joining the podcast. We loved having you.
We loved having you on here. It just, for me, having been interested in zoo med before, it's very fulfilling and inspiring to hear from you. So thanks for taking the time to be with us and with our audience.
You too.
Oh, yay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, for everyone who's interested in joining the membership, go ahead and go to theinvolvedvets.com and sign up, and you can have connection and community with lovely people like Cheryl.
Cheryl will be on there, and this
Yeah,
summer we're going to do a deep dive into finding our values and how to apply them.
Can't wait. All right. Y'all have a fun one. Stop revolving, start evolving.
Until next time, let's stop revolving and start evolving.